For those that are on the floor, if you have something to say, you might just kind of put your hand up real quick. That way she can catch you saying it. That would be appreciated. For those that are on the floor, if you have.
Everyone ready? Okay, let the record show that it is 6:40 and the special council meeting, October 29th, the city of Durant is now in session. Would everyone please stand, and James Dalton will give the invocation, followed by Mike Morris doing the flag salute.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the day, the beauty of the day, the breath of life you give us, the health you give us, Father. Lord, we pray for those families that have been affected by COVID. We pray for our community. Lord, we just thank you for the country we live in. Being across from the courthouse today, we've got to watch early voting all day, Father, and it's such a blessing to watch our people getting the opportunity to express their freedom of voting. Father, we pray that you lead us all in our convictions as how we'll vote, Father. Lord, we thank you for this body of people that's gathered together. We pray for wisdom for our leadership, Father, and we just thank you for every good thing. Be with our families. In Jesus' name, amen.
Will you join me in the pledge? I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Shear. Here. Councilmember Tomlinson. Councilmember Morris.
Here.
Vice Mayor Brittingham.
Here.
Mayor Groby.
Here, all 5 councilmen are here, so we have a quorum, and I believe that Kevin will call his group to.
We call the roll for the planning commission, please.
Here.
Here. We'll let the record show Clint is absent at this time, on his way. Okay.
Our order of business, number 1, under order of business, discussion of the Durant 2040 Comprehensive Plan.
That's also our first item of business for the planning commission, discussion of the Durant 2040 Comprehensive Plan.
Ms. Danielle.
Good evening, everybody. So you guys have received the comprehensive plan. This is a project that we have been working on for quite some time. It's actually worked on before I even came to the city of Durant. But so we're at that point now where we'd like to kind of get it back off of High Center, be able to try to get that plan through and all that. But part of that is getting some feedback from council and planning commission as far as what the goals are, what you guys would like to see. Based on what's within the comprehensive plan now. It's been drafted about a year now, and obviously things have changed dramatically in that year already that it's been drafted. So staff has kind of gone through it quite a bit. We're getting some outside people helping us to go through that. Imagine Durant's been a part of it, Main Street, some realtors in town, Public Works, a lot of different groups of people have been really working together to try to kind of put this back together. So I thought I would start off by kind of getting some thoughts and opinions from you all to see and have that discussion about what you guys is, if you guys have read through it, what you guys think, what you guys would like to change, like to see in it, things like that. A part of that conversation will also go around the future land use map, which is something that we're going to be working on as well to get done. And that is just kind of a both of these are long range plans of where the city would like to be. This doesn't mean that we're making changes right now. This is about 20 years down the road, what we'd like to see. And it's an important document to have. It helps guide the planning commission. It helps guide the city and staff as far as where we're going to go in the future. So with that, I will kind of turn it over and we'll start some conversation and discussion. And then we'll kind of go from there and see what thoughts and opinions that we have currently. So. Anybody?
Danielle, I have a question.
Sure.
You made a statement, you said that there have been dramatic changes since December of 19. Could you tell everybody here what some of those changes are?
Sure. When this was drafted, we didn't have the Blue Zones project, which is starting in Durant. And that kind of is working in tandem with the city. That's kind of the big one, but just development overall has been increasing. And that's something that wasn't really anticipated, I don't feel like. There's just, that's kind of the bigger things that have changed, but obviously a lot of staff changes. We didn't have an economic development director. We had an interim economic development last year. Now we have a full-time economic development director. So some staffing changes have kind of affected that, which they may have some thoughts and opinions, and they have the document and are looking at it presently. So that's kind of the big things that we're having.
I have a question, Danielle.
Sure.
We're planning on building off of this thing on the screen that we got from IBTS, or we kind of throwing that out and because it is already dated and doing something from the ground up?
Ultimately, the decision will be up to you all of what you would like to do. My recommendation would be is not to completely throw this out, just because we've come so far with it. We can definitely make a lot of changes to the document, and what we'd like to see and if there's dramatic changes, then okay, maybe we need to start over. But they did a lot of public input from what I was told, so we don't necessarily want to lose that either. But ultimately, like I said, the decision is going to be up to you as far as if you want to start from scratch and have a new plan, we can do that. But I don't recommend completely throwing this one away. It has some good pieces in there, and still has some good bones to it. Just probably needs to be tweaked a little bit from with all the different projects and different things that we have going on in the city now that we didn't have when IBTS was here.
It's a good base. So.
Danielle, I have a question concerning the future land use map.
Sure.
The one, I guess, it's over here on the wall. That's our
Yes.
current one, right?
Yes, that's our current one, yes.
What have we changed thus far in relation to that map?
Well, the draft that we have so far includes some mixed-use corridors along the University, Main Street, First Street, kind of those kind of areas. There's some nodes that I've been recently learning about that are kind of developing into some mixed-use areas. So I'm going to learn a little bit more about those and see if those would be something that we want to include in this or not. I don't have enough knowledge about those yet to know if that's worth really putting in here, or if it's just something that has developed and we just need to make a note of it, type of thing.
Do we have a copy of this draft?
No, we do not. It's mostly in my head. Mostly in my head and notes of what I'd like to do. We have not drafted the actual, what it's going to look like on paper. Aaron will be doing that piece of it, which is our GIS tech. He'll be doing that piece of it. What we're also going to be looking at is some of these areas that we have. When this was done back in the early 2000s, they have it's more of a zoning map really, because you have blocks, small little blocks of development that you're saying, okay, we want this to be residential, right, and then right next to it, industrial or something like that. And generally that's not how you want to keep it. You want to have some buffer between your industrial and residential. But that's kind of what was done back then, and we've worked with it, but it's just not functioning very well. And our planning commissioners can tell you that we've run into several situations where they'll have something before them. The current land use map will say one thing, but it doesn't really fit the area anymore. One area was a residential area that's kind of going more commercial now, but it didn't meet the comp plan currently. So that's the issue that we're dealing with. But the draft is not completed at this point.
Which I guess brings me to a follow-up question. Originally, this is supposed to be completed by July.
Correct.
So do we have an estimated completion date at all? I mean, this is started in March of 18, I believe.
Right. That was gonna let you guys tell me how quick you'd like this done. And we can make it work within, because it's gonna take Aaron a few weeks to get a land use map done. He said it could be about 3 weeks or so. But it would be something that we continue working on. I have the other partners, they're continuing looking at the document right now. And they're kind of wondering, they ask the same thing, how quickly we want this done. I think realistically, we could probably look at the first of the year to be able to have it completed. But, however much, if you guys want, I wanted you guys to kind of provide some feedback too. How quick do you guys want this done?
So are you talking about having the future land use map and the comp plan both completed, or just the land use map?
It would be both. It would be both. I would like to have them both together. That would be my goal. And John can correct me if he has a different opinion, but I would like to see both your comp plan and the land use map put together and adopted together. That would be my goal.
Hello. Okay. I read the comprehensive plan pretty extensively. I don't know what I would change in it or what I would recommend changing. It looks a lot like lots of other master planning documents that I've read.
Right.
I think it's comprehensive in terms of a plan and actions by the city to develop different committees and other sub-plans with that. I'm not sure how you would adopt this without the map in conjunction with it.
Right.
I don't think you could do one without the other, or ideally, you wouldn't do one without the other.
Exactly.
But I mean, in terms of the document itself, I thought it was well done.
And there are some repetitive things that are within the document that I personally would like to remove, just because we don't need to say the same thing 10 times in the document. So that's mainly the changes that I have seen that might happen. There might be some additional goals potentially that haven't been discussed. If you guys see something in there that you're like, oh yeah, it would be nice to, we're at this point now, it would be nice to have this a few years down the road or whatever. So.
Well, when you're developing one of these in school, the more pages, the better it looks.
Yes, but I don't like a whole lot of I don't like a whole lot of fluff in documents. I like to get to the point and be done. So are there any thoughts as far as have you guys thought about where you guys would like to see the city go? Would you like to an idea of the mixed use, because that's something that's definitely come up a lot of times. And currently our ordinances don't have anything to really allow for mixed use except in the central business district. So in the comp plan, there's talk of expanding the CBD. Then we have other areas of town where developers are inquiring about having mixed use, where we've never thought about that before. And probably when they originally started this plan, they didn't think about in that area of having mixed use before. Just wasn't thought about at that time. So, but I'd be happy to listen to any thoughts that you guys have, anything you'd like to see for sure, or areas of town that you're like, oh man, it'd be cool to have a mixed use area here, or whatever,
Your definition of mixed use is mixed use, or do you have a defined?
Mixed, well, I do have a definition, but it won't be one that's very clear. Mixed use is essentially mixing together two different uses, where what that means is typically you have your residential and your commercial piece of stuff together. That can look either where you have, where you can have a commercial business here, and then right next to it, you can have a residential building, or kind of the historic way that was done, where you have your commercial downstairs and residential upstairs. That's what we have currently downtown, but there's lots of different ways of having mixed use. Essentially is.
Kind of leave it open, or do you try to find?
You know, for me, I kind of leave it open for what the city looks like as a whole, because not all areas are going to develop the same way. You have some areas that's going to be mixed use that already currently is, where you have that commercial and residential working tandem together. But in other areas of town, it would make more sense to have it where it's if it's a greenfield development, it makes sense to kind of have it where you can have the 2-story type of things and have where your commercial's downstairs and residential's upstairs. That's your typical way of seeing it, but they have it where it's kind of a low density mixed use, if you will.
And I had a question similar to Danny's. If we're going to use this document as a real guideline and try to follow it as closely as we can, it needs to be as flexible as it can.
Yes.
Because we're changing, and what we see is streets that are residential corridors. One doesn't have to look very far to recognize that that's going to be a commercial corridor soon.
Right.
And I, often over the years, as someone discusses the comprehensive plan, well, that's residential, or that's, I'm just saying as flexible as it can be would make it not only easier for these ladies and gentlemen and you,
Right. And typically,
to discuss those variables, and maybe variables is a better word, but or otherwise we'll be diverting from it for years to come. So
you're exactly right. Your comprehensive plan typically needs to be a flexible document. It's also one that's going to be updated on a regular basis. It should be updated yearly. It should be,
Well,
ideally.
and I mean, that's a good point, because we've been working on it 2+ years, and you're right. I mean, you are right, Danielle, that but in the real world that sometimes doesn't happen.
You're right.
But the urgency, and I appreciate your saying the urgency is there to really on an annual basis to look at that and see what is changing.
Right. Good point.
Danielle, I had a question on mixed use. Is there a time that mixed use is going to be other than commercial and residential?
There could. It doesn't happen very often, but it could. Like I said, your classic and normal mixed use is your commercial residential, because those pieces tend to work very well together. You start getting some other stuff, then you have some kind of land use disagreements, if you will, where we've seen where the industrial and commercial, sometimes there's conflicts there, and we don't necessarily want a concrete plant next to a store or something like that. But you can. It's not very seen very often, but it is possible to do something.
I was just assuming that was most likely the case. I just
Yep.
wanted to.
Yep.
I didn't want to move forward with that mindset if there was something that I was missing. I know one thing from my standpoint, or that we run into in the planning commission, if we have it, whether it's mixed use or different types of land use, it seems like the concern we have from the citizens and neighbors basically is the unknown. What's going to happen if they zone it C2? You got a list of stuff that they could put in there. And one thing that I think would help, I don't know how we would do it necessarily, but one thing that would help is, especially if we're getting into something rezoned or we have a mixed use, if somebody applies for something in that realm, is that they come in with a project and they say, I want to put in a clothing store. Then we have something that ties them to that, what they say they're going to do there. And it's, I know we have conditional use permits, but it would be nice to have something that could stay with the property. And because we have people come in, I want to rezone it for, I want to get R3 so I can put small R1 homes on it. They get R3 and they go build an apartment complex.
Right.
And the neighbors, you know, it was all, everybody's pointing fingers at what they said was going to happen. And we don't have a way to hold them accountable once we, you know, allow that zoning. So that's just a thought that I had, that if we can have, we can drill into, if there's a zoning change and they say, I want to change it for this reason, for this project, that we have some way to hold them accountable to that. Since some of our zoning classes are broad, they can put a lot of things in them.
Right.
So
And let me elaborate on that too. That's a good point, because over the years, several occasions, when it gets to council, we've drilled down to what that property owner was going to do with that property. But on a handful of occasions, that property's then sold later. And I think that might be a question for Tom. Has, you know, the conditional use permit approach or change of ownership, and it's got to come back again or something for our, if it's going to be indeed something different than what it was approved for. So, I mean, that comes up a lot, you guys, and then here in the chambers.
I know I have if there's a way to do it, I would prefer, instead of a conditional use permit, from my understanding, goes with the owner. And so I think by statute it does that, but it would be nice if it had a use that could stay with the property. So if it changed, they're not coming in every time and keeping track of it. I don't know what's easier or better, but it would be nice if it would stayed as the use on. So.
I will say in general with your zoning regulations, you generally want to have what they can do. Doesn't mean that they're always going to do that, but they have to be something within that specific realm. What we could do with the R3, because that seems to be the biggest one that I've seen so far that has caused some issues, is you could separate out that R3 just a little bit more to where, or you could create one that's just multifamily. And that way your R3, if they want to have like a duplex or a smaller lot for a single family home or a duplex, then you could have the R3 for that and then have one that's just multifamily. And that way that would kind of separate out those conflicts. You don't necessarily have to have it to where, and there's a lot of cities that have just a multifamily zoning ordinance for apartments only. And that a lot of people do that, but so that's something that could be done, but I could see it where we could break that out for sure. And after this, the next step, once we get the comprehensive plan done, is to update the zoning ordinances and the land use ordinances to match the comprehensive plan. So that's going to be another big job that's going to come up right after this. So.
And the example we had recently, the R3 and those examples residential we have, but one of them that we had, they wanted I1. And then there's a concern of, hey, we want to do warehouses. Well, if you get I1, you could bring in a plant and put it right next to the cemetery and be making all kinds of noise when it just didn't seem like a good fit. So that's another example of, there's a wide range in I1 that it'd be nice if we could address that in some form or fashion.
And I would say that would probably be best addressed whenever we're doing that ordinance update and we get to that table. So you can kind of fine tune that a little bit, because it is outdated and there's a lot of things in there you can add or change just a little bit to where it kind of makes more sense. And we're not stuck to the zoning categories we have right now. We could change that a little. We can make it to where it fits what we're dealing with and what the comprehensive plan is going to reflect as well.
Are all those classifications, C1, O, let's see, CO, C1, C2, C3, R1, R2, I1, I2, and all those. Who determines what goes in all those? Do we do that?
Council does, because it's in
That's correct.
ordinances.
Good, good. Okay, so can there be an R1 through like 20?
I mean, you could
So
do,
that you could have, you could drill down to these,
you could,
in other words, not have a list that they can do this long under R3 or C1, but C1 may shrink to that and down here
Jerry.
at C20.
Sorry. The city of Durant has very few zoning classifications. Other municipalities have similar to what you're talking about. There may be an R1 through 12, or there may be a C1 through 12. But I think Durant's just hasn't been updated in so long that, we've got an umbrella, C0, CO or C1 has a huge umbrella of what can go there. And part of what Danielle's talking about of kind of restructuring our zoning ordinances to incorporate more classifications is
That would get us closer to
it's a
what
direction we need to head
you're
in.
saying, Kevin.
Yes.
Billy.
Yeah, and those classifications also affect the land use map, right?
Yep.
So if we want to do that with our classifications zoning, we'll have to look at our land use map a lot more detail. So.
Yeah. That's true too.
Danielle, I'm having issues with the mic, so I'm just gonna speak louder if that's okay. To Kevin's point, I think that's gonna be even more important if we have mixed use. For example, if someone has a residence in a copper kettle, that's a whole lot different than overall. So to be able to make those restrictions is gonna be vital if we're gonna have mixed use.
Agreed. And that's where those ordinances come in place. Because if you can create, a mixed use zoning category, and then that can be as specific or as vague as you want it to be. You can,
Thing that, we've noticed in the past is they come to chambers with a particular idea and presentation, that's lovely. In practice, to Jerry's comment earlier, it's sold and then becomes something completely different. So we don't have any teeth, in what we've done so far. The documentation hasn't been that great either, in terms of, what we're approving or recommending. But beyond that, holding them to that, has been difficult. So when we're thinking about those ordinances, I think we need to put some thought on that as well.
Tom, do you see that any hiccups with going that direction? And
No, and admittedly, I missed some of that discussion, but what I picked up on was we clearly do need more classifications. Now I guess you get to the point where you get so specific that you can only build one thing in any given classification. But to Mr. Keener's point, you get into a problem, the more exceptions you make. And if you don't have something that's narrowly tailored enough for particular use, you start making an exception or designating a specific use that's narrower than what our classification has. It almost has to run with the owner from a legal standpoint, because you can't there's not a provision to burden the land or burden the property. It's sort of like a lien would do or something else to prohibit the sale of that property. So it has to almost run with the owner. Whereas if you did it by zoning and you had narrowly tailored zoning classifications, then that does sort of run with the land. You've got that particular piece of property zoned a certain way. If they want to use it differently, they come back and ask for a rezoning that would allow them to use it that way. And then any subsequent owner would have to abide by that. But those exceptions are tough to make those run with the land. So they run with the owner.
One of the things that I've noticed listening to some of the applicants is, and some of the attendees is, people are anxious about the future. They're anxious to build a really nice property without knowing, what's gonna happen right next to it. And so, I agree, comprehensive plan probably ought to be broad, but when it comes to land use, I would think specific, really aid people and encourages investment. When people can make significant investment, they're going to be able to take the risk out of it. And I think we need to be in a position to help them do it.
it certainly encourages the type of investment that we want to be made, rather than the person that comes along and says, well, I'll be able to build anything I want. Those are the people that are gonna be mad about narrowly tailored zoning, but that's probably not the investment we want.
Yeah, and I think too, what Tom was just saying about, you don't want it to be so restrictive that we end up with 100 zoning categories. In speaking with the planning director in McKinney a few years ago, I mean, we all know how fast McKinney just blew out at the seams of their development, but they don't have 100 zoning categories either. But what she did tell me was that there are very few things that happen there development wise that are not a PUD. And I know there's lots of pluses and minuses to PUDs, but if there were, say, a dozen zoning categories, you're not going to fit everyone's development plan into one of those dozen, but there may be, C number 7 with these PUD requirements would allow that to happen. So there's sort of an overriding zoning category that has your broad restrictions, but then some of those exceptions are put into a PUD, which may be something to help. We don't need to reinvent the wheel on Durant's zoning. We do need a few more categories, obviously, but the more extended use of PUDs may help developers feel more inclined to invest in some of those properties, even though it does have a restriction that they may or may not need to wiggle on. PUD, planned unit development. So those PUD, and this is Tom's wheelhouse, not mine, but those planned unit developments have very specific rules associated with that particular piece of property. So they may be under a zoning category of C1, C2, but they have a set of restrictions on top of that, or a set of variances on top of that allow them to build whatever it is they're desiring to build that may or may not fit exactly within that C1 or C2 zoning category. So it doesn't discourage someone from building something on that particular piece of property, but they do that knowing that they've got some restrictions or variances associated with that.
Shane, with that, I can see that working in the initial application process for that property or owner, developer, whatever. But then should they sell it, it seems like that would also afford the flexibility to that second owner. Or I guess we're saying the same thing would apply to that next property owner, but it affords them that subsection, whatever,
Right.
under C1 or, okay.
The PUDs typically stick with that property. So if someone comes in with a PUD, they say, okay, this is what we want to do, it sells. But if it's significantly different than what was there, then they have to come back because it doesn't meet that anymore. It doesn't meet that piece anymore. I don't know if that came out exactly
The
right.
PUD is technically a zoning category, is how it's seen by municipalities. So you make exceptions to the zoning to form a PUD. They're all over the Metroplex, so yeah, it's very common.
PUDs are everywhere, and a lot of places are trying to use them more of as an overlay district. That way you have your base zoning, but in a way, it is a way of kind of allowing some flexibility in development that normal zoning ordinances would not allow. So Shane did a really good job at explaining it.
Clear as mud.
You still have that, but if you do it like that, you still have that underline. If we go in and sort of make a few more narrow zoning classifications, even if that PUD goes away because the owner decides not to do it, the owner financially fails or sells or something like that, it still slips back into that narrow category that the surrounding landowners can rely upon. It doesn't go then back just to a broad I-1.
Right.
We've got more narrow zoning. So I see PUDs more than exceptions to the zoning. making things more specific rather than making broad exceptions to the zone.
Right.
But they can do both.
So in regard to the future land use map, do we need to work on zoning prior to the
What your land use map isn't typically very specific. It's not going to have your zoning categories on there. It's going to say multifamily here, agriculture here, industrial here. It's not going to say, okay, you want R1 here, R2 here, R3 here. Correct. And that's where you want, like, you can put on there like your single family homes and your multifamily, have that distinction of your land use map. But you don't go specific as saying R1, R2, R3, C1, C2, that type of thing. You generally have it to where it's light residential, heavy residential, and that's usually referring to density, which is your R1, R2, R3. You have to translate it from one to the other. I think we can. I think we can definitely move forward with that and have an idea of what it is that we're dealing with and kind of make it more broad than what that is. It's not going to be as specific as what we're currently using. Because that's like I said, you don't generally have just little bits of land use determination in the middle of other land uses. It's generally more broad, more blanketed than that is. So. But there was talk about areas that's south of town that's currently industrial on that map, but what's being done and what's foreseeable in the future is more of like your ag or large residential developments, more so than, or even some of your smaller, like your R1, R2 type development out that way versus industrial. It hasn't gone that way. There's some areas around the bypass I think probably could potentially still be industrial at some point, but just because you have highway, you have rail nearby and all that. But, that when that was done, the bypass wasn't even here. So, or maybe it was and it wasn't completely done. I'm not sure, but it wasn't obviously indicated on the map at all. So that map is very, very outdated, as you all know.
It's always been an issue to me when we're asked to request to approve or deny the zoning request based upon that map. I have a lot of trouble taking that as authority.
Yeah.
This thing over here says 2002.
It's old.
So I'd consider that a big priority to get that thing updated personally.
I think we're talking about residential, if we don't, like, to follow up with Drew, if we don't look at what changes we may make to like residential zoning, then our map, is it going to read R1, R2, R3, or is it going to read low, medium, or high density?
Yep. It'll be low, medium, high density. It will not be the zoning classification.
All right, that should fix it. Or
Yeah,
in
right. And you
mind,
just translate that low, medium, high density residential into your zoning classifications, which no matter how we divide that up, you're still going to be able to translate that.
Yeah, and that would make sense if the way we're set up now, if you have R1, you have certain square footage and lot frontage requirements. R2, you can still build single family, but so if we did it that way, it'd be easy to say we could have an R1 low, medium, and high density lot size. And so if it was high density residential, you could shoot for the smaller lot size for R1 homes or maybe multifamily and meet the same.
Yep.
So, yeah, okay.
Yep. Any other comments, questions, guidelines that you'd like staff to know before, as we're moving forward? And if you're not happy at all, like with the comp plan, you're like, we just need to start over, definitely let us know that too. I don't recommend that, but that was. If that's what the agreement is, then that's what we'll do, right? But at the same time, I'll leave that up to you guys, but definitely let us know if that's what you want to do. on the land use map. If there's something you'd really want to make sure that we know about, you guys have been in this community a lot longer than I have, so you have a lot more knowledge than I do. But I can definitely kind of see what's happened based on what I've seen and what I've experienced, and bring the planning knowledge I have to the table and kind of be able to map out what's where, and what we can do. So, but I'm definitely open to whatever you guys, the city council and planning commission kind of ultimately guide what we're going to be doing. You guys guide staff as far as what it is and what you guys want the city to be, where you guys want the city to go.
Do you feel like from the discussion this evening that you have some good direction?
Yeah.
A better direction?
We can, we'll definitely work on it, and we can definitely work on getting a kind of a draft put together once like I said, we have a few other entities looking at it. And there might be some tweaks that they're going, oh, we'd like to tweak that and all that, just based on the age of the document. And we have some realtors that's looking at it, and some other entities of Public Works and Imagine Durant that's kind of also helping out with that too. So there might be some small little things that will change, but we can have a draft for you guys and say, okay, and then it'll be up to planning commission and council both to say, okay, this is what we want to really. It's when you kind of get really in the nitty gritty details, but we can definitely make it work.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you.
Danielle, could you, and if this is not the right time, we could do it later, but just understanding how you move forward with the future land use, if you could give us like how that works, like just in a nutshell of, do we pick the corridors and we have commercial and we build out some multifamily, we work this way, or, I mean, so just to understand it, to have input,
Sure.
how does it kind of get put together?
The way I kind of have been doing it is I kind of looked at what is currently on the future land use map. I looked at our zoning map, and then I looked at kind of what's happened and what's happening. So a lot of it, you can kind of see that trend in certain areas. And one of the trends that you kind of are starting to see is some of that mixed use spreading further out. So that was giving me the idea of having the corridors, some of the major corridors, having some more mixed use than what it currently does. It doesn't, with the future land use map, it's not going to be, a lot of people sit there and think, oh my gosh, we're going to change this to a mixed use area, but it's all business right now. That's not going to work. Well, in 20 years, it's possible that those businesses aren't going to be there. But it gives that guide saying, this is what we'd like to see in this area. It makes sense that down the road we could develop towards that, if that makes any sense at all. But then we also look at, with your commercial corridors, you look at, where are they currently? Is there new commercial corridors forming? Is there something else going on that we've had some major developers coming in and wanting to do some different things that haven't been thought about before, which is why we're going, oh, wait. And that's going to happen down the road too, but that's why you update your plan yearly. Or if a really, really big project comes in, that's going to kind of alter the land use map drastically. That's when you revisit it at that point and say, okay, now we have something that's going to really affect the city largely. But it's just looking at it and just kind of dreaming and thinking about what we'd like to see, what's going on, what could be. I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but it's more dreaming than anything.
I guess the balance, I don't know if there's a balance of what you said, plus what infrastructure do we have? And
Yeah, that plays into it as well.
So all those different things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you have to look at the infrastructure, but ultimately with your comp plan, that's going to guide your infrastructure plan. So, and after this, Marty and I talked, and there's going to be a capital improvement plan that's going to be done. There's going to be a street classification plan done, which is needed. And but that comp plan is going to guide that, because your comp plan is supposed to guide development ultimately. So that's kind of what it does. It'll help guide where the infrastructure is going to go. It's going to help guide all the other pieces that are going on.
Danielle, thank you for your work on this. Just as a sort of a former councilman a long time ago, and looking at this from a legal standpoint, city attorney standpoint, and development standpoint, this is probably the most powerful thing that the commission and the council can do. This, if done right, can have effects for the next 50 years or 100 years. I mean, instead of being reactionary and then having the council and the commission put in bad spots when somebody comes to develop something and we've got an outdated land use map, and you guys have to make exceptions for one group and not make an exception for another. If this is done right on the front end, you guys don't have to do that very often anymore, because the land use map is created and then updated, and the developers come in, they see where they can build what they want to build. And they don't get to just pick a spot and say, now we're going to go get the exceptions made for it. And we get a chance to sort of drive the development rather than just be reactive to it. And I think this is, you see this in other places. We've needed this for a long time, and it's sort of started and stopped several times. So I'm glad to see it, coming to fruition. But this is probably the most powerful tool that the commission and the council will have.
I agree, and I like to tell this story. It's not the best story, but the story is this. In 1972, a comprehensive plan was drafted for a city. Fast forward 45 years later, the land use map, the comp plan wanted just a small town. Again, remember, this is 1972. This is in Oklahoma. They wanted to have just a small town feel. They didn't want any retail. They didn't want this. They didn't want that. 45 years later, that's exactly what they got. But being in Oklahoma, now their budget is stifled because they don't have the sales tax that they need. But so that's why it is a powerful tool, because they followed their comp plan and their land use map beautifully. So much to the point, though, that they didn't bother updating it for almost 50 years. So that created a whole bunch of other issues. But that's a little story I like for people to know, that that's how powerful it is. It can guide you into good or bad down the road.
You could almost pick anyone around the Oklahoma City area.
You're very, very close, actually. Yes, but there are several towns in Oklahoma where their comp plans are 40 to 50 years old. With the last updated comp plan that I did, it kind of spurred, it was really weird. It kind of spurred a bunch of other towns around us to really develop their comprehensive plan. And so I was dragged around to several other cities, helping them figuring out what do we do, because we've never done this before. So it was an interesting time. But yeah, there's a lot of cities that are like that. That one in particular is in the Oklahoma City area.
And, one of the, considerations when we had, some of the workshops, developing this, is we got to talking about what recruits people to a city. And the education or schools within a community is always one of the top ranking mentions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I felt was lacking in this was what sort of collaboration can we have with schools, with Durant schools? For instance, can we create an environment that will encourage developers to build in city limits, increasing tax base, increasing, student count, et cetera. So, for me, that was one of the things that we should highly emphasize, is how the city's going to work with schools, to build schools, being that that is a recruitment tool.
Drew, I think you're right on. I think part of the challenge is actually the school district boundaries. And you probably know that as well as anybody. But
Economic development, everybody, jobs is a reason why people move. But generally, the second or third reason why somebody moves to community versus another one is school. And I think we're underutilizing the partnership.
Any other thoughts, comments?
Danielle, we do appreciate your work on this, and really you have to have a plan. it would be, to me, it would be hard for any city to move forward without some kind of plan,
Yeah,
because
correct.
if someone come to the city for something, it would be nice to say, well, we can look at the city plan and see if we can do this, rather than have to back up and punt and get into all kind of different disagreements with different entities over things. So we do need a definite good plan, and this sounds like it's a good beginning.
Mhm.
So we appreciate the work you've done.
No, my pleasure.
I guess we'll move to item 2, discussion of regulations concerning manufactured homes within the city of Durant.
Our item 2 is the same, discussion of regulations concerning manufactured home within the city of Durant.
Okay, I'm going to start this, then I'm going to get a drink of water. Um, So what this is, what I wanted to bring you guys together is a while back, we brought before the Planning Commission to update and kind of tweak the manufactured home ordinance. Thank you, Drew. Yeah. And so what we're going to be, we brought a kind of a draft of the ordinance to Planning Commission. And then there's a lot of questions of, well, what is it that we want to do? Do we want to create a separate zoning category for the manufactured homes? Do we want to have manufactured homes with doing the CUP process and the R1, R2, and R3? Or do we not want to do that anymore? So rather than kind of do some talking amongst ourselves, one of the reasons that we wanted to have this joint meeting was so that we could all talk about the manufactured home ordinance and what you guys would like to see with that. Ultimately, and there's also some issues that are coming up with that ordinance, in the fact that there's a lot of conflicts in it. There's a mobile manufactured ordinance, and then there's a mobile home ordinance. Neither one agree with each other, and they have different stipulations that they have to follow, which are completely different, but in the definition, they're similar. So we're kind of left with staff's going, okay, well, how do we handle this? And then we have people wanting to put mobile homes in, or manufactured homes in areas, and we're going, well, yeah, but we don't know which way to go. So we wanted to kind of bring this to you guys to start a conversation about what it is. First of all, do we want to have a separate zoning category that is strictly for mobile homes? Do we want to continue having mobile homes in the residential districts that are like the R1, R2, R3? We've had a couple come through since I've been here that went through Planning Commission and City Council for the CUP process. So that's one thought that we've want to discuss, and that's kind of the couple big ones we'll start with. So.
I had a question for Markham. So in consideration of, mobile homes, I'm putting you on the spot here, and assuming you've memorized every law that's ever been written. But do you know if fair housing addresses whether we have to allow or have an area designated for those? Do you know if that is addressed?
I don't know the answer to that. But
We do. We do have to have an area designated for it. So we don't have to have it intermingled with other areas.
that's what I was about to say. I don't think there would be any requirements that it be in certain spots, or you couldn't, relegate it to, the edge of the landfill. But the cities have enough latitude to create areas where they have certain things, whether it's R3, whether it's R1, and the same could be said for manufactured housing. And I don't think there's anything that says you have to have so much of it, but I don't think you could.
I guess
you certainly set yourself up for a fight if you tried to prohibit it, period.
That was my question is, do we have liability if we eliminate it?
I think you would, in the same way that, or maybe not the same way, but in a way that if you tried to eliminate a particular building material, you couldn't have, you had to have a certain type of, a certain look for houses, even though there are other houses that are just as safe, just as fire safe, just as structurally sound. Once you start narrowing those things to, so much that you start getting in a bind.
Makes sense, thanks.
Is this manufactured housing or home ordinance as it is written today that we have here?
Yes.
Are any suggested, were there any, I couldn't tell, or at least, are there suggested changes in this?
There is not. I just gave you the ordinance, the way it was written.
Okay.
Some of the changes that we included, was, I'm trying to remember, there's some that included, still allowing the CUP process.
Well, you're saying changes, are they in this?
They are not. They are not. That is the current ordinance, how it is written.
Okay.
I did not include that document. I didn't want to make it more confusing for y'all than
Okay.
not. So I figured we'd keep it simple. There's some stuff that is outdated in that ordinance that just generally we'd have to kind of update anyways. But one of the big questions is currently we allow by right mobile homes and manufactured homes in A1 and then in a mobile home park. So those are two areas that they are allowed by right. But the CUP allows for a person to come before the planning commission and city council for an R1, R2, and R3. So that was.
And that's where we've had issues, right?
Yeah, that's some of the issues. And then right now, also one of the issues we're dealing with is we have the manufactured home ordinance and then the mobile home ordinance.
Okay.
So
That's kind of, so I think the issue before the council members and before you too, but it is the CUPs and a mobile home in a residential area.
Yep.
And the short of it for me is that's what needs fixed from my perspective, not only for you, but for council.
Okay.
The others, you have the expertise or
Mhm.
and with Tom's assistance and
Yeah.
John's.
Yep.
But how do we fix that CUP when you're put on the spot, we're put on the spot of really following kind of what our thing does say, but the CUP allows you to be a judge or to change it or whatever. So how do we fix that?
One way to fix it is to go through and draft the ordinance a little bit stricter or better to where you tweak it enough to where it would suit what you wanted to do. Or you could just do away with the CUPs for mobile home, manufactured home, and R1, R2, and R3. That is a possibility you could do as well. So, I mean, it would depend on if you wanted to keep the CUP process for the R1, R2, R3 or not.
So CUPs are apply to other things other than mobile homes too.
They are.
But that's the avenue in order for a mobile home to be considered in a residential area.
Correct.
If you remove that possibility, you've kind of you've got a solution there.
That is a potential solution. Yes.
I mean, how does anybody else feel about that?
Actually, Jared's kind of thinking along the same lines. The CUP in that, I believe it's 16 pages for the mobile home, manufactured home ordinance. Does it mention the CUP in that ordinance?
Ooh, I think it should. I'm trying to remember. Sorry, it's been, as we're looking at
I
the comp
guess
plan last week.
My question is not as simple as amending that ordinance, taking that out, if
Right.
it is, or amending that ordinance and adding that this cannot be circumvented via
No.
CUP.
Yeah, you could, it would be easy to take it out. And then from this point forward, no one would be able to apply for a CUP to go forward in the residential area.
Oh, never read that in.
I don't think that it is.
I don't think that it
It
is
may not
either.
be. I don't have it in front of me, but
So do we just advise somebody that possibility and so they take that approach or?
it's within the table of ordinances that it's listed as R or something, which is restricted or whatever that is. But that's what triggers that CUP process.
I think what Jerry's asking is the average citizen probably doesn't even know what that is. So when they come in to ask if they want to put one in a certain place,
Yep.
are
And
they
then
told, no, you can't, but you can apply for this?
Right. And I believe it's actually in this conditional use
That-
permit.
That is in
ordinance.
that is in the ordinance. It's not called CUP in the ordinance, but there is a spot in the ordinance where it says it can be placed in R1, 2, or 3 with a specific application coming before the board for essentially a variance or CUP. It doesn't call it that in there, but there is a section in there that outlines what that process is.
Okay.
It's near the end of the ordinance, 152.48.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's located, it does give a kind of a conditional approval.
Yes.
Provision.
Yes, it does.
I mean, from my perspective, that if we can make that, just define that or not define it or be more clear on it can't be in an R1, R2, or 3, then we're done.
Right. And that's definitely doable.
We talked I mean, it was just really broad, but along the same lines that ag, you can see that being okay. It's going to have at least 5 acres. Mobile home park, okay, that makes sense. And when it comes to residential, if we have something that's zoned R1, if it's on a 50-foot lot or 80-foot lot, I can't imagine a part of town you're not going to get pushback. And I can see why. So I don't know if we can attach, do we have any R1 zoning? Let's say someone has well, I guess they could just change the zoning. They had R1, but they had 5 acres. And they said, I want to put a mobile home on my R1 property and I have 5 acres. So I guess they would just rezone it to ag if
it meets the ag requirements,
it meets that requirement. So I was just wondering on a mobile home, I agree with
Right.
ag and R4,
Mhm.
but is there something in another R category? Could we put a lot size to it? If you have so much land, you're going to have, I don't know if that would be a determining factor, if it's worth discussing. I don't know.
And the more you do something like that, the better off you're going to be, because every time you put in a conditional use permit or something that has to be approved on an individual basis, the commission or council opens themselves up to a claim of arbitrary approval. And from a legal standpoint, that's when you get in a jam, is if your approval is somehow designated arbitrary, determined to be arbitrary by the court, where you approved one, but you didn't approve another, and there's really no distinction between the two, other than maybe more neighbors came out and complained about this one. So the better you can define where those and under what conditions a manufactured home can be placed on the front end, the better protected the city is from, being determined to be arbitrary in its individual decision-making each time.
And we do have an existing lot of record ordinance, which is what, for like the smaller lots, that's what that typically follows, is the existing lot of record. Now, that ordinance needs to be cleaned up as well. Tom and I both were reading it and both were going.
So, Mr. Tomlinson, from my perspective, the commission was asked to review the ordinances and zoning around mobile homes, to make changes. And my response, I don't want to speak for everybody, but my response was, I would really prefer to hear from you, the council, and John about what's desired before we start making changes, because from an individual standpoint, I didn't know what changes to start making. Because I didn't understand what this group would want. So if it's just finite restrictions about when and how we do that, I don't know if a specific zone, zoning classification would make the most sense or what, but I would like to hear from some of you all about, what's desired, in terms of mobile homes and manufactured homes.
Well,
We serve you all.
I appreciate that too, Drew. But Tom has mentioned it, when we make arbitrary decisions, we're putting ourselves out there. And the more that we can do to eliminate even an arbitrary decision is where we need to go. But we have things in place apparently for mobile homes. Mobile home, I can't think of the language and all that right now, and we have some things in place. But for me, over the years, the difficulty I've had is, and we had one just a few months ago, in split vote. Those have been the ones that have come before council over the years, is that very scenario. And I think we've talked about how to maybe remedy that this evening in removing the CUP and whatever would go along with that. But then what Kevin's mentioning too is, and Tom mentioned, at least plugging in the gaps on what could be done and lot size and what could be considered and making those things definite. Whereas when it comes before you, it's black and white, and your recommendation into the council is black and white. I know that's where you want to go, and I assure you that's where the council would want to go too. I'm not an ordinance or a zoning guru by any stretch. I appreciate Shane's expertise and what he shared this evening, and Danielle's and John's. But I hope I'm sharing what'll kind of fix it. But what I've observed over the years being those very things that have come before council. I think Tom can allude to that too. When you run council, even a property for commercial, and that wound up being really could fall under one of those arbitrary, and then later on it falls under the very definition of, I think that property sold, and what's going to become of it now under the broad definition of C2 or whatever it was. I can't fix it all, but to me, the low-hanging fruit here for me as a council member is removing having to respectfully decide against a property owner that wants to put a mobile home in a residential area, and your heart's jerking at you and everything else. But at the end of the day, a residential owner would prefer not to have a mobile home in there next to them. So I think you've got an idea, at least for me, on where we might go with it, and reducing or even eliminating that, having to figure those things out. Drew, I don't know if I answered anything.
Yeah, you did. I mean, what I'm hearing is, for one, just clarification where it's black and white, so we can make decisions without, throwing opinions. I think the second part of the question for me is, when we're looking at language or language changes, is how open do we want to be to mobile homes or manufactured homes? And if we are open, where? So if we're, to Mr. Markham's point earlier, if we're not able to eliminate, what are the restrictions and where should that be allowed, if any?
I think that's where that task force and realtors and the folks with some expertise can really answer that question. What do communities do, other communities do? And I would need some direction myself. What do other communities do, allow, or have in place for mobile homes, mobile home additions, mobile home parks, what are they called today? Mobile home park? Or modular homes?
Yeah, and I think there's two different, for me, there's two different, categories. There's the mobile home park, and then there's a mobile home or manufactured home on a lot, on a single lot. So, when, where do we consider those for approval?
Drew, I just want to say that I actually concur with what Jerry has said and what has been said here today, that I think that getting rid of the CUP and what Kevin said about the ag, the acreage or the lot size, I think is another one. I think we're covered by what Tom is saying by still allowing them to go into existing mobile home or manufactured parks, or I believe it was A1. And so I feel like that's enough to allow someone if they want one. I think one of the other things that we need to clear up is, what is your definition of a mobile home, manufactured home, or modular home? Because it's sprinkled all through here. Well, I guess we can leave out modular, but manufactured and mobile, when you read that ordinance, they go back and forth.
They do, and that's, and that's what we have struggled with as well, is looking at it, because you have the different classes, which is based on what HUD has. But then you have one that's a mobile home definition, and that's just a very vague definition. And so we're like, a mobile home, to us, pretty much that manufactured home definition should fit everything that we get in the city. So I'm not sure why they have that mobile home definition in there, but that's what kind of given us a lot of headaches, is you have a manufactured definition, then you have a mobile home definition. And they're very, very similar, really, and in construction and everything else. It's just how they view it. I guess a mobile home is more of one that's able to be moved out easily and still on its wheels. But the definition says that it's meant to live in for a long period of time. So
I have an enforcement question, Danielle. It's a fact that we have some, what I would consider a trailer house in the yards with people living in them today. Do we kick those people out if we get a more stringent ordinance, or will they be grandfathered in?
for a container home,
Someone with a mobile home in their yard with someone living in it right now, do they get to stay if we make that illegal, or do we grandfather them?
They'd be under a CUP already.
A mobile home or like a travel trailer?
Mobile home.
it would depend on what, if
I
we
don't
had a
want
CUP.
to rat anybody out, but I know where some are.
Well, and I think and that's probably a question we need to ask if we do away with the CUP, because we do have some mobile homes in town, and they were grandfathered in, I think. And so then you have to decide, well, what happens when that house either gets dilapidated or is destroyed by fire or natural disaster? Then you have to decide whether that grandfather goes away or whether they get to replace it with product, which is what the council faced here a few months ago. And if you clarify the ordinance, you don't have to make that decision with the CUP. So, but you can grandfather someone in that's doing something legal. So if it's legal today, regardless of what the ordinance changes, you could grandfather them in. If what they're doing now is not legal, you don't grandfather them in by changing the ordinance. You probably just need to enforce the ordinances that are on the books right now. So that would be, if somebody's living in a travel trailer now, that's not legal. And so you don't grandfather them in, period. But if it's a mobile home that is not illegally placed now, then if you change the ordinance, you don't get to go the next morning and go root them out. They're probably grandfathered in at least for a specified period of time.
And if we do change that, we'll have to have that clause in there saying for so many amount of time, they're allowed to be that way, or a natural
Or until the
disaster.
occupant changes, or until the ownership changes, or something like that.
Yep.
The
That's
CUP
triggering event.
dictates that. Too.
What's that?
The CUP dictates that.
Right.
You cannot, not unless it's not on a residential piece of property.
Your current ordinance does not allow you to live in a travel trailer.
That's correct.
Correct.
You cannot live in a travel trailer in city limits.
Danielle, I wanted to say something concerning using the term mobile home and manufactured home. It's what you said, or somebody made the statement about a mobile home is considered something that can be moved and has a tongue and wheels and all that. But the flip side of that is most of these mobile homes that were brought in, the tongues have been cut off because if it's left on, it's considered personal property and it's taxed differently. So what has happened over time is that term has changed. And I only say that because I do real estate appraisals, and there is no category for mobile homes. They're all manufactured homes because they're transported the same way. And when they're set up on site, the axles are taken off, the tongues are removed, and they're skirted, and most of them are attached to a permanent foundation. So I think when you draft your ordinance, obviously we still have what people would consider a mobile home in town, but by classification, I don't know 100% that that's the case. So I'm just would encourage you to do a little more research on what actually a manufactured home is and see if we can eliminate the other part of that altogether.
And our feeling, just as a staff wise, was to look at getting rid of that mobile home, because we see the same thing where that mobile, and that was an old ordinance still, and manufactured home, you're right, is not any different than what a mobile home used to be, other than like the tongues and the axles and all that are removed. So that's kind of what we were thinking, leaning towards it, and then making those manufactured home definitions a little bit more clear about what it is, and then being able to follow that. But that mobile home piece of it has been, in the CUP process, has just been a little difficult.
But we'll clarify that there are plenty here in town that do have tongues still on them. So.
Yes.
And I guess a follow-up question would be, do we have, I mean, I know we have some manufactured home parks. So are they designated? I mean, out by Walmart, one comes to mind.
I believe they are. They have a zoning classification just for that. I believe there's 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, there's not many left.
No, there's not many left. And there's one that they came to me and they want to essentially be more of a single family area with a mobile home on it rather than a mobile home park, because they're getting out of that business. But they're still figuring a few things out. So they haven't gotten very far.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I think I have one more that hopefully is a quick item. I think from the planning commission side, and my view from the planning commission side is, is there a general consensus that we should allow mobile homes in R1, 2, and 3, or should we totally relegate that to only R4? And I say, is there a consensus? Because the people in this room are the ones to determine that consensus. And outside of taking a vote, I think maybe just a general discussion, speak up on what you think. You hate to really cause hardship on any citizen, but at the same time, the overall growth and well-being of the community when it comes to those R1, 2, and 3 lots is what's at play.
Exactly.
One consideration that I think is not arbitrary when determining what can go where is effect on surrounding property values. So if it's determined that in an R1 area, or maybe even a particular R1 area, if there is going to be a significant effect on surrounding property values, if you allow manufactured housing in R1, because then you start having to make exceptions where it can go. Can it go in this R1 neighborhood and not this one? I think the argument would be, and probably successfully made, that if you're allowed to put a manufactured home in Remington or, somewhere that's primarily site-built homes, there will be a significant effect on the surrounding property values. And that's not an arbitrary decision. So to that end, I think it probably makes more sense to going forward to have an R4 or a specific designation for, manufactured housing parks. And then, if there is a reason to make some exceptions or do something different later, you could do that. But just to have it wide open where you could have, manufactured housing in R1s, it kind of goes back to the discussion we were having earlier about the comprehensive plan. It sets these bodies up for problems if you have to go in and make decisions on whether you can have a manufactured home in this neighborhood but not in this one. And you have to make those certain findings before it's not arbitrary. Whereas if you sprinkle some R4 around certain areas, then that kind of gets you where you need to be a lot easier, I think.
And one of the problems that comes with that is some of what's considered a tiny home is now that ones that are being wheeled in, we don't allow, but if they're just a stick built, what's considered a tiny house, that can be allowed with the current ordinances. So that, again, it's kind of the same way, but luckily they, with it being wheeled in, it's considered not a manufactured home, but a travel trailer type of thing, not an actual home. So
My understanding is the tiny homes have a title like an RV would rather than.
correct. Yes, you're
That's
exactly right.
I think that's the term.
If they have the wheels on them.
But just a point of clarification, we're talking about, issuing R4 or developing R4, or are we talking about the mobile home parks or a mobile home on a single lot?
To me, those are 100%. And I think that would be up to this board if these bodies here, if you wanted to limit manufactured housing to a certain, certain zoning, and in that zoning, if you could do that, you wouldn't have to allow manufactured housing at areas other than in manufactured housing parks. As long as you sort of broaden that to where it's not so narrow, but, and that way, if this body wanted to say you can't have site-built, stick homes next to manufactured homes, I think you could do that and still avoid problems.
What falls under R4, Danielle?
R4 is the mobile or manufactured home park.
Okay.
So that's
I-
specifically a park.
Tom, for me, and it's not an actionable item, but how can we reach, or I think Shane's got a good point that, I guess to gain a consensus, I wouldn't say what I was for, but or what I was against, but I'd just say I don't have any issues with R4.
And you could always make some exceptions to an agricultural property. You could say on agricultural property, you've got 5 acres, somewhere you can, it's permissible there. But once you get into more narrowly residential zoning, you can limit them to R4. If that's what you chose.
So there are several 5-acre tracts on the barrel, 5-acre tracts behind your law firm, and all down towards Washington. So if they give it to A1, we're allowed to move on.
Well, I'm just saying that is a possibility you could do. I mean,
And that's the way the ordinance currently is written.
that's right.
And there's also areas that are zoned as ag that's not 5 acres. And so they would technically be able to, but the catch there is because that property doesn't meet current zoning ordinances, they most likely have to have it rezoned because it doesn't meet ag. So they may not be able to. So I think we had a situation come up with that when Tom and I talked about it. It's been a while back. But
So rather than using ag, would it be easier to develop a zoning or mobile home fit on a lot and just that way it could be used sparingly and appropriately. You know, to Clint's point, I don't think some of the properties that he mentioned would be approved.
So if we're creating an avenue where they could put something in there, then we can't say no. That's the.
You're talking about through agriculture now? Yeah. So what I was saying is, do we want to create a zoning specific for that use, and then we can use it sparingly as desired? But it would be a clear cut use.
So are you talking about a zoning in a specific area, or could it be anywhere?
That's where I think these guys want away from is saying yes to a specific area.
Well, if you had the certain qualifications, you could certainly do it. You know, right now, R4 is pretty narrow in that you actually have to have a designated manufactured housing park. So I think there's certainly room to expand that. And maybe be more specific than to say that it can be in an agriculturally zoned area. Because that's right, those exist in a lot of places where people wouldn't expect them to exist right now.
And you could still have those same parameters and call it new zoning.
Sure.
And by creating, if we did create a new zoning category, that would be for mobile homes. And if we did away, however we wanted to make that, if we did away from an ag or whatever, and only had them in that zoning category in mobile home parks, with it being a new zoning category, they'd have to come in for a rezoning, and it'd have to be heard by planning commission and city council.
Yeah, and just to put my opinions out there, I have no dog in the fight whatsoever, but I know, through, at Clint's point, using ag, it's permissible. And we get into a question mark again, which is what we're saying we don't want. By having a specific zoning classification, at least it comes before council and either that fits in that location or it doesn't. And so, my desire, like yours, is just to have something clear cut. And I think as long as it's accepted in other things, it's a question mark. And I think that's why we had a question mark on the last one.
We can only say no to spot zoning, and that's why that would be a spot zoning. Because it's all five, and all one.
That's right.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Thanks.
And that wouldn't be an arbitrary.
That's
reason.
Clint made the point better than I could. Thanks.
That's the best comment I've heard yet. So whatever we need to do to make that happen.
Just clarify to
Got
me,
it.
if you would, how that works, how that would work.
As
How
far
would
as
you-
creating a new zoning category?
Yes.
Okay, so we'd update the ordinance the way that we currently have, and then we'd add a zoning category that'd be specifically for mobile home parks, or mobile homes specifically. And that could be whatever we wanted to call it. It could be R5, or it could be, whatever, RM even, or well, no, not RM, but whatever we dreamed of wanting to call it. You could call it that, and then it'd be an ordinance that'd be in place, it'd be codified and all that, and then that would be pretty much it.
Okay,
That-
so you've created this new ordinance,
Mhm.
the new zoning, R5 or whatever it is.
Right.
For mobile homes or manufactured homes.
Yep.
Nothing to do with manufactured home parks. Where are you going to allow them to go?
That's the next question. Is
That's
where
what I'm
would we-
asking.
Yeah, and that is a good question.
Because if it's still the same broad, you're going to allow it R1, 2, 3, wherever. Process is no different than what we're already doing through a CUP.
But there could be a 5 acres southeast towards my pass, southeast third, that we may start allowing that and not do a spot zone. But if you're looking at, off of Gerald Farrell or North First or somewhere there, we might say, no, we're not going to have a spot zone.
So are you going to designate an area in the future use map?
We could, and that we
I mean,
could.
because if you don't, an example would be if we keep the same broad approach that we have right now, there's a house that was condemned on 10th and Elm, 11th and Elm.
Yep. Yep.
So if they wanted to come in, we had a broad stroke like we do now, then all they got to do is go through the process And how are you gonna tell them no? If
That
you
would be
don't have
considered
an
spot
actual
zoning.
zoning place for that? How would it be spot zoning right now?
Because the surrounding area, spot zoning is where you have one specific zoning category brought in and dropped right in the middle of something else. So, for example, in this example, you have R1 or R2, whatever that is all around it. Right in the middle, you want to put R5.
So again, I ask, you're going to have to designate an area on that future use map that's R5 in order to comply with what Drew's saying, right? Well, that's what I meant. That's what I want to clarify.
Or is R5 compatible, whether
Right.
it's density.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could put it where it's like a kind of a higher density area. That's usually kind of where a lot of people like to place mobile homes, but that's also where you want to put apartments. So, you know, if you guys would rather see them, what kind of areas would you guys rather see them in? Would you guys like to see them in the lower density or the higher density is a question.
I think the higher density would be closer to in town. So if we put them with higher density stuff, we're going to have them right back in town where most likely we don't.
I agree.
Yeah.
And it should be more out on the periphery in the remote areas.
And
Exactly. Yep.
I think if we had an R5 near A1, I think that would be permissible.
Right.
That would be an argument.
Yeah, you're
Would,
right.
would you
yeah.
maintain the 5-acre lot? That's-
And you could specify that
Yeah.
where a mobile home R5, because just like we do with the setbacks and all that in R1, R2, and R3, we give a certain lot size. You could definitely have a certain lot size for R5, and you could say you have to have a 5-acre minimum, 4-acre minimum, whatever that dream number is for you guys. You could definitely do that, and that would be allowed.
I got you. I just need clarification on
No,
the difference between the two.
Yeah,
As
no,
far
you're
as,
good.
I didn't want us to be right back in the same boat we're in.
Right? No, you're right. You're
But
right.
I can see it with the R5, with how you're explaining it.
Yeah.
You know, that, or Clint, or the co-explanation over here, so.
Yeah.
I think it's a way to clarify what we're trying to do going forward versus stepping on the toes and looking at what's been approved and hasn't been approved in the past. You know, if you were to do something like create the R5, from that point going forward, we know where those things are going to be allowed. They're not going to be allowed to drop a block from City Hall because we've done it in the past. It seems like a clean way to maybe help make that transition.
Well, and I feel like it's one more thing too, that puts us in the right path of what Tom was saying. It gives us another option, that we're not excluding everything. We've actually created another way to include.
I think too, as you begin to put these thoughts and discussion into written form in an ordinance, you and Tom will probably say, whoops, well, okay, and that, and, you know, I just think once you start
You're right.
seeing it in black and white on paper, it'll fall into place a little better and can be tweaked, but in other meetings
Yeah,
with-
exactly.
with the zoning and planning and zoning commission and John and others and council.
And another issue that will be coming eventually is the container homes. That's a new one that's on the horizon. So just giving you a future outlook. But there's a lot of different things that's starting, just different developments that we've never saw. And it's on the cusp of kind of becoming a popular thing. So we'll see where that goes.
Are we going to allow tree houses? That's a serious question. No, I'm serious. That's a serious.
No, you're right. I don't know that we have anything saying you can or cannot have a treehouse, to be honest.
In town.
Right.
it's the parking requirement for tree houses at 2.5. Or just curious.
You have to have an elevator.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay. Okay, I guess we're ready to move to item number 3, discussion of sidewalk improvement regulations within the city of Durant.
That's the same for us. Item 3, sidewalk improvement regulation within the city of Durant.
Sidewalks are a topic, we really don't regulate sidewalks being placed with development. Something we probably should consider. I know it's a big thing in blue zones, is sidewalks. And I know several council members have talked to me about it, and I know they have opinions on what we should or shouldn't do. So they want to talk about it. I know it's near and dear to Mr. Scherer's heart.
I agree with Councilmember Shearer. It's not just an aesthetic issue or a public health, it's a public safety issue. And if for no other reason, if people don't consider it a public health issue or an aesthetic issue, if nothing else, it probably needs to be considered a public safety issue, especially on some of the main thoroughfares. I mean, you go down University and there's people on the road all the time, and that's because there's nowhere else to safely walk, whether it's wet or whether the grass is high or the ground is rough, and you got people on, in motorized wheelchairs, and I've seen people almost hit any number of times, so has everyone else here, by the way. So I agree with Danny. It probably should have been on board long ago, and the best time to plant a tree was 40 years ago. The next best time's today. And so whether it's in platted areas that the city required, uniform sidewalks, or whether it's in, areas where building permits are issued for single family houses along some of the older streets. Maybe the sidewalks for a while are sort of checkerboarded and not connected, but every time there's a building permit issued, if you require a sidewalk to a certain specification, eventually those are going to start to link up. And so I think that's something that should be considered, and sooner rather than later. I agree with Danny on that for sure.
And I'll just echo that too. Over the years, I think I shared this the other day in a meeting with Steve even, that I can honestly say that I think as much discussion as I've been through on streets, sidewalks are right up there with at the same level as far as folks expressing concerns and wishes for. I have no issues with whatever we need to do.
There's still a program that the city will pay for the labor. Or will pay for the concrete.
That is correct. Yes, sir. Not used very much at all, though.
No.
You're one of the few.
Wait a minute. Clint said he tried. Who said what happened?
They will ever make arrangements.
Okay.
I've left over the check.
Okay. John, you heard that, so. And of course, that's how long since you tried?
Last time I tried was 2 years.
Okay.
Well, we'll do it
That guy
now.
can-
I can guarantee you
That
that.
guy can fix it up there.
I have actually partook of that a couple of times, and before I was on council, so just clarify that. And it's a great program. It's not just sidewalks, it's also the curbs, if you want to repair those, and also the driveway skirts as well.
I don't think they advertise that.
Yeah, it's not advertised at all. So, and it's really a good program. You said a significant amount of money. I do think that it ought to be, limited. You had this discussion before, John, that to homeowners, as a point to businesses taking advantage of it. Unless you see something different that you could do there.
We built a high school, we're building a elementary school, we built apartment complexes, church out there on Yellow, Burleigh, no sidewalk.
Built fire department, police station too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Was it last year? Everybody thinks a high school student goes walk to school. I many times I was taking my daughter to school, it's still dark. Raining, or 7:30, band practice, stuff like that, and there'd be one or two guys walking to school. I think there's one hit last year, I don't think he hurt bad, but one hit.
So, and I'm all for that. I'm on board. It is not a huge expense at all to incorporate that in, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when that sidewalk is not the code, you know, it's kind of split. That's why I think there needs to be some uniform, you know, where the city takes control and say, hey, we want to take that and build it ourselves, make sure it's the code, our inspection, but you know, we see a lot of them are splitting or not done right. How do we address that?
It's simple. It's in the code already. The property owner is responsible for maintaining them. There's a lot of things that hadn't been maintained. So
Along with that, there's probably literally miles of sidewalk that we don't even see that are covered up with, or have grown over. And it's sad. And enforcement is a part of that, like John said. But I think the kind of the discussion is along with new home building, et cetera, even developments or multiple homes, that be a part of, you know, they're going to do the streets, but they're going to do sidewalks too.
And Jerry, I believe it was you was at a meeting last week, I believe, and you talked about, or maybe it's Steve, talked about a sidewalk reclamation program. I just wanted to bring that up because I thought that was something that was worth having a conversation about for some of these sidewalks that we currently have that are buried and we can't see them anymore. So just wanted to bring that up.
That
So
goes right along.
And Elm and Evergreen would be, or Elm and Evergreen.
Those are two prime examples that there's probably 90% sidewalks from First to Washington, but quite a few of them are either have cars parked on them or they're under a foot of dirt. They're still there because when it gets hot, the grass turns brown, you know, when everything else is green. So I don't know what that looks like as far as on the city side, but it's definitely something we should be trying to fix. And again, like Jerry, that's the low hanging fruit, but it's there and we can fix it. So, and I think just the city employees that I've talked to in the past, that the attitude's kind of been that as far as sidewalks, well, we may or may not have made them put one in based on whether there was one on one side or one on the other. So it's just been kind of a, I don't know, the word would be just a spotty approach at best.
inconsistent.
Very inconsistent. So it's definitely something that we need to work towards getting remedied.
We'll work on some regulations.
Would the start be to start with the ones that are existing and refurbish those? Would that be the place to start and have the people who build a house put a sidewalk in front of it? Is that not the order? Do they not have to do that now?
No, ma'am, they do not. So,
I don't know why I thought that when someone built a house, they had to, okay,
in most cities you do,
yeah.
but we're different. I think you've told me that before, Mayor.
We're good though.
But Mayor, they could, I mean, we could make it. You know, that would be up to the council, but you could do it, you could require new home, new platted areas, when someone comes in platted development, require, you know, new construction in older areas. Or you could require it if someone gets a building permit. I mean, I don't know that would be, I don't know how much that's done, Shane may know that better, but if you have a building permit above a certain level at an existing home.
I've seen it.
If you're going in and you know, doing minor things that you might need a permit for, maybe you don't require that, but if you get a building permit above a certain level, part of that should be to go out and put a sidewalk along the street.
Right. I've seen it done at 50% value of the home, right? So
If somebody buys a home to flip it, and they go in and gut it, and
do some things, maybe they have to put a sidewalk in. That's part of the permit process.
That would help quite a bit.
Overnight, it's not gonna get sidewalks everywhere, but you start at one point, eventually it gets there. And if you've got 3 houses in a row with a sidewalk and then one without, that landowner hopefully takes advantage of the city program to come to get a 4th sidewalk. And if eventually they're all there, we start getting some neighborhood pressure to get your sidewalk.
Do we have any idea how many sidewalks are under dirt?
No, but I do know there's a lot because you see it all over town where it just ends in the dirt and it appears back on another lot. So the sidewalk's still there. So I haven't been here long enough to determine all of them, but I can tell you there's a lot on 3rd and 2nd and Elm and
Same with curb too. Sometimes we'll end of the block and next time it's big up. That's all about color.
I do want to confirm what Tom was saying, because we live on Second Street and we get our stuff in the city. The property owner north and south of us in the same block also took advantage of that and we did ours. So there was that entire Second Street on 400 block. There's sidewalks, the whole length of that. I'm not saying they are as they carry on, but from Maine pretty much to there, it's, it does kind of have a leapfrog effect to a point, but I think it's a great program. Hopefully it'll be advertised a little more, not to the point where the city employees can't do other things, but it's very beneficial. I do want to add, I think it more goes on to the next one, but I'll go ahead and mention it as well. Whenever we're doing our community development stuff and we're approving new homes on lots, one of the things I've noticed, sometimes we're allowing them to build a driveway right over a existing sidewalk where the cars are parked on the driveway, and the sidewalk on either side of the adjoining properties literally parked right in the middle. It's not that they're not pulled up enough. That's the entire length of the pad that they're parking on. We got to stop that. I mean, if the lot's not big enough to build on, it doesn't need to be built on. So I think that goes hand in hand with what we're talking about.
that's the idea of item 4.
Yes, but I thought I'd bring it up since we're on sidewalks.
I will say too, I just calculated it up. If you have a lot that's 100-foot wide, I don't know how wide sidewalks are, about 4 foot, let's say 5 inches thick, it's about 6 yards of concrete. So just to your point about if you pay for the materials, I mean, you're paying, $600-700 worth of concrete to go across the front of a residential lot, somewhere in that range, rebar. So it's going to be in the, $800-900 range, I would think, just to give you an idea of what the homeowner would be out expense and then labor would be by the city. So just to give you that idea.
Oh, you're right, Steve, that sidewalk crossing the driveway ought to be about like a crosswalk. You just should be able to park in it or remain in the sidewalk.
And that could be included on the site when you do a sidewalk ordinance type of thing. You definitely see that on there saying that, your driveway cannot block a sidewalk or whatever, and that would eliminate that problem.
I think that's already a matter of law.
Oh, is it?
Is it not, Chief, that you cannot block a sidewalk?
Yeah, it's state law.
You can park in front of your house and block the street though, right? I'd hate to run them out of there, run them onto the street from their driveway.
Some of these streets have no parking. So that's where we go back, I guess, to the next one, that item that the buildability, I guess, or of a lot. And sometimes they just may or may not should be built on if it's not big enough.
Anybody else? Are we ready to go to item 4? I think we kind of touched on that a little. Discussion of the regulation of property lots and improvements within the city of Durant.
Yeah, item 4 for planning commission discussion, regulation, of property lots and improvements within the city of Durant.
Again, this is an item that that several council members have had discussion with me about. And like Mr. Brittingham was saying earlier, is a lot actually big enough to build something on? That's a concern that we have all over town. So I don't know if you want to talk about it or not.
I didn't know it was going to be on here. I'm sure it won't be the facilitator for the conversation we had, but since we touched on it some, we'll go ahead anyway. That was one of the questions that basically was in the form of the question. Is every lot buildable with the current ordinances we have?
Not every lot is buildable, just because you have an existing lot of record. That we had one particular lot, there's 3 lots joined together actually by one owner. And they were not able to build on those lots because they were too small and it didn't meet the lot of record because there were 3 conjoined lots by the same owner. So what that owner wound up doing is doing they had to do a replat and then it was a lot split, and then they turned around and had to get an exception or variance from the Board of Adjustment to kind of have a little bit of leeway on the setbacks. So it was a little bit of a weird process for him to do that, but not
We're talking about the one on Gale Trail?
No, that was a different one. This was off of, I guess it's now Magnolia out there.
We don't want
Not yet.
Oh,
Not until November 1st.
2 more days. I'm sorry. Old Highway 70 or old Highway 70, whichever one is continues off of Mulberry. Thank you. I just didn't remember the street there.
To some of the old timers, that's New Highway 70.
Exactly.
East Main is old.
Which Highway 70? Yeah, you're right. So, yeah.
Where the old oak tree used to be.
Yes.
This is correct. And the old sketch room.
And the knee hospital is up there where they found
That is
I'm going way back, the knee hospital is there, where most people say that's old hospital.
Right.
So my understanding is that it's a single residential lot, not necessarily the scenario you just gave. And obviously, it's not a new subdivision, so the setbacks they're not defined. So is it my understanding it's a percentage of the lot, what the setbacks will be?
For the lots of existing records.
How does that work?
I'd have to look at that ordinance. Tom, do you remember off the top of your head what that is? I want to say you're right. I think it is a percentage. But I don't remember what that percentage is. But I think it is a percentage. I don't know.
Well, that's fine. I don't necessarily
But they,
need to know it.
it's back into, some places doing zero lot, zero line lots.
Right.
And then playing with the required parking.
Yeah.
Some of what I'm seeing, I guess, what prompted the conversation with John is that you're seeing existing lots where the homes are tore down. Maybe it's a single family residence, 1,000 square feet, thereabouts, parking's on the side. It's tore down, it's most cost effective for the new structure to be a duplex. But in doing the duplex, they're pushing the structure further off the street to create parking in the front, because the lots aren't big enough anymore. In a couple of instances I can think of, by doing that, they're pushing that new home very close to the other existing homes that were already there. And some of the pads are obviously not level. They were fine for the 1,000 square foot home, but when you pushed it back further on the lot, it's been built up. And I don't see how it can keep from creating issues or flooding for the house below them. But we have no way, we don't control that at all.
The only way we control that with, as far as if it's a duplex going in, is either one, the zoning, or B, the lot size requirements for a duplex. For a duplex, I believe it's 8,000 square feet, I believe is the minimum, which is supposed to help alleviate the problem of having the parking within that close of the of the street. Because if I remember right, there's somewhere saying that you can't create hazard parking by being, you know, you have to have it where you're pulling out on the street or something like that. You can't just back out onto some streets. If I'm thinking that's somewhere in there, but I might be mistaken.
So you're saying they can't back directly out into the street?
Well, they can, but it can't be, on certain streets they cannot, I don't believe. If I remember that right, or if I'm, Mark and I had this conversation about a duplex that was wanting to come in, and that was part of the issue that was facing. But I might be remembering that wrong, but I remember.
Well, that would be confusing, not knowing what street you could back out on or not.
While she's looking, a quick follow-up, I looked up that in our parking ordinance, it does say that you cannot park on a sidewalk. You can't park on a crosswalk. It lines some of that out in 72.35, if that helps push that along.
I know that is a focus for the PD at this time too.
I know in the past on developments I've had, I don't remember the exact language, but when it had to do with being able to back out onto the street, if you had a parking requirement that was more than 6, you had to have off-street parking that they're gonna have to nose out. They can't back onto the street if their development parking requirement is more than 6. So you can have 6, but you get to more than 6, you have to have a parking lot that's got a ingress or egress. You can use the same one. And that's what's determined some even development I've done is once it got over 6, you can back out onto the street as long as you're 6 or less. If not, you have to have a parking lot.
I think there's an example of what you're talking about on 3rd Street, where you have to, before you get out. That's really all I had, John. I didn't, like I said, I wasn't expecting to talk about that.
Okay.
Are we ready to go to number 5? Consider approval of ordinance 1918, amending the code of ordinances of the city of Durant by adding a new subchapter pertaining to revocable permits, establishing regulations for a revocable permit and setting a permit fee and declaring an emergency. Ms. Danielle again.
So this was an item that was brought up actually by several business owners wanting to come to the city and had the idea of putting things that would ordinarily wouldn't allow, or we didn't have a way of we didn't really have a mechanism for approval or disapproval, really. They wanted to put items in the right of way. So staff did a lot of research and working with Tom and John and a lot of other people was involved of trying to figure out what the best way to move forward was. Ultimately, what we found was a revocable permit. The revocable permit allows for the ability to have, for someone to put something in the right of way, whether it's a sidewalk, whether it's a balcony or whatever type of item it is. This ordinance specifically has an area for permanent items. So the sidewalks, the balconies, that type of thing would require an engineer review. That would require city council approval before they could even move forward on it. There would be a review by staff as well as you all to look at that. And it'd have to be approved. And if need be, there'd be a building permit if it required a building permit. But the revocable permit would be that mechanism that would allow that to happen. There's also another piece in here where if it was administratively, where it could be administratively approved, and those would be only for non-permanent items. So if someone wanted to put out some tables for dining, or if they wanted to have some merchandise or some painting on a sidewalk or something like that, that would be non-permanent. then that could be approved administratively. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. The fee that we've discussed is in the ordinance as well, and that was $300, which kind of would be just mainly for the engineering fee and staff review for that process. And that matches what our other ordinances or other permits allow for the fee. So.
And John, I think you and I discussed that with you, and I think I understand now. I thought at first it made it sound like that everybody that put a table and chairs out on the sidewalk had to pay $300. I listened to the live streaming, and it was a little bit misleading, but my understanding is this is for an engineering fee if someone wants to change, and it has to have an engineering fee.
Correct. The administrative does not have that $300 fee tied to it.
What would an engineering, help me understand, what would we or they need an engineer for?
So for example, we have a business that wants to restore one of the old businesses buildings downtown and put a balcony with seating.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha.
This essentially allows a business or a person to use what is city property, a city right of way, without granting them an easement or a property interest in that city property. It gives them a permit to use it, but we're not granting them an easement to use it.
Right. And it could be
That goes
revoked.
with the land. We're not giving them a property interest that goes with the land. We're granting the business owner or the landowner a permit to use it.
Correct. And it would be something that if the city decided down the road that they wanted to take that back for whatever reason, then they had that ability. Whereas an easement or something like that's a little bit different.
If
of a
we needed to
process.
widen the street, we could go back in and reclaim that right of way. Whereas if we granted an easement or some other property interest, we'd have to go back in and purchase that interest that we gave them from them.
Correct. And just so you all know, the planning commission did recommend this as well.
Yeah.
So.
And then you've had these questions before or issues or concerns before that you didn't have anything to work with.
Yep,
And,
exactly.
If the city revokes it, does the property owner have any recourse and reimbursement of cost or anything? Is that just
Not really. This is sort of a,
dice that the business owner wants to pay?
it's a property owner risk.
Mhm.
And so you're right, they would have to sort of balance that and look and see if there's any, this is subject to future plans. I mean, if you look at the current business that's looking at putting the balconies, that the configuration of those streets has probably been the same for the last 100 years. So the chances of that changing dramatically is not very good, but I can see a scenario where the property owner would take some risk investing something in construction, and then later the city, comes back and has to retake that right of way for some reason. And it comes with some risk to the property owner, because it's not something that the city is compelled to give in reimbursement of cost or anything to the property owner.
Any other questions or
I move
discussion?
approval of 1918, ordinance 1918, section 1.
Okay, this is under our 5A. We have a motion, we have a second. Would the clerk please record the vote?
Councilmember Shear,
Aye.
Councilmember Tomlinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Morris,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brittingham, Mayor Groby.
Aye, motion carries.
Move
Un-
approval of ordinance 1918, section 2.
We have a motion from the item B with the emergency clause. Do we have a second? We have a motion. Who was that? Did you get that one?
Danny.
Okay, thank you, Danny. We have a motion. We have a second. Would the clerk please record the vote?
Councilmember Shear,
Aye.
Councilmember Tomlinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Morris,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brittingham, Mayor Groby.
Aye, motion carries. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Motion and a second. Would the clerk please record the vote?
Councilmember Shear,
Aye.
Councilmember Tomlinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Morris,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Brittingham,
Aye.
Mayor Groby.
Aye, the city council is I guess we're adjourned. Kevin, you need to adjourn your group, I guess.
We have a motion to adjourn the planning commission.
I'll make that motion.
Second. Please record the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
I really appreciate y'all coming out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle.